Thank you very much. And you may have been here this morning. You heard one presentation on an advanced program from Texas Rio Grande Institution. And so Dr. Rodriguez presented that as a case study for implementation of a program from Advance. I think you might think of this as another case study with a twist. So let me first start by thanking the meeting organizers for the invitation, and also to point out that my colleagues and co-authors on this presentation. Okay, let's see which one goes forward. Okay, great. Are all here in the room as well, and so we'll all potentially be available for conversation later or to answer questions as well. So again, you may be familiar with the ADVANCE program. This is a program from the National Science Foundation to support the success of women STEM faculty at academic institutions, focused specifically on STEM tenure track faculty. And our grant was of the variety called Institutional Transformation, which is meant to take a sort of a systemic approach to developing mechanisms to support the success of women academic STEM faculty. We are a consortium. We've been working for about the last 8 years or so as a consortium, and I'll get more in a little bit about how we came to this, but just so you know the institutions that are involved here, we are a collection. Dayton, Ohio region has many universities and institutions of higher education. We had chose to join together 4 institutions where we already had a variety of connections, but also intentionally that were highly diverse in their background, their mission, their culture. And so the 4 institutions, we always list them alphabetically. Air Force Institute of Technology, so Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is in Dayton, Ohio, and houses the Graduate School of the U.S. Air Force. It's a STEM institution. The faculty are civilians, but the culture is embedded within a military institution. And as you can see, about 800 students, all engineering and mathematics and management, which is part of the institution. Central State University, I'll show you these on a map later, is a smaller institution, what we call in the US an HBCU, historically black college and university, and so has a long history of serving especially the interests of that population. Third, University of Dayton, just south of downtown Dayton, a Catholic Marianist institution, mid-sized private institution with a full range of STEM and non-STEM undergraduate and graduate programs. And then my institution, Wright State University, part of the Ohio State system, so a publicly funded or assisted, still somewhat, university, for those of you who know the American funding situation. Mid-size, about 17,000 students, and again with a wide range of programs. So we joined together for these efforts. Coming into this, we had a lot of the same challenges that we've been hearing a lot about already today. So you're familiar with many of these. Demographic underrepresentation of women. I'll show you a couple of data slides to illustrate these points, particularly in certain disciplines, engineering and physical sciences, physics, chemistry, etc., are most prominent for this issue. Transparency in data sharing. So if you belong to any of our institutions, or if you look at the websites of any of our institutions, you will probably have a hard time finding out, without a lot of hard work, what the demographics of the faculty are at our institutions. It's not transparent. Implementation of best practices in hiring and promotion, again, an issue we've heard about a lot today, overcoming bias issues and proper wording in advertisements and recruitment of diverse pools and all these issues. Inconsistencies in departmental leadership training across the 4 institutions. There's a wide diversity in the kinds of programming that's already available on campus, some stronger, some less strong, and addressing different kinds of issues. And then dual career hiring, one I'll get back to a little bit later, a big issue in the US academic STEM disciplines especially, where both members of a partnership are academic faculty and need to be supported for their professional development in the hiring and retention process. Just to show you a couple of bits of data on these things, this is typical. Actually, I'll show you a panel of these in just a minute. This is for the Air Force Institute of Technology. So green representing female and gray male. Just the obvious take-home point that women are highly underrepresented in the discipline as a whole. There are whole departments that don't have any women. So a sense of professional isolation, a lack of colleagues and role models and professional support of various sorts may derive from this kind of circumstance. And you can also see the asterisks here are the number at the full professor rank. We'll get back to that actually in the very next slide. Oh, not quite. Here's another bit of data which I don't think we've seen exactly like this yet today. So we did a lot of data analysis, and turns out we discovered, this is from my own institution, Wright State, that women seem to put themselves forward or be put forward, one or the other, for promotion less readily than men. And so the graph on the left shows the proportions of men and women who were at the associate rank for 8 or more years, which through normal professional advancement should be long enough to be ready to be promoted to the full professor rank in our system. 18% of women in that category, and yet only 6% over a 5-year time window who actually were promoted to full professor. So this is an issue partly of perhaps the candidates themselves, but of the system, the mentoring, the support within their programs for advancement. So another example of the kinds of issues we wanted to address. And then the lack of advancement, as we've just been hearing about, leads to a dearth of women in higher leadership positions. So these are ranked from, you can read the caption here, tenured full professor through various levels of administration. And again, just making the obvious point that women are highly underrepresented in administrative ranks. This is particularly, specifically for women from STEM disciplines. So these are all issues that we were hoping to address. And we have continued, as we were doing before the advanced grant and as we have been funded by the advanced grant, to pursue our individual institutional solutions to these issues. So this is just a couple of examples. The presentation that Dr. Rodriguez gave earlier today, where he talked about all the range of programs that they've been implementing to support recruitment, retention, success of STEM faculty, women's faculty, have been going on at our various institutions. But I don't want to talk about the individual institutions today. What I want to spend the rest of the time talking about is our effort to work as a collective of a consortium of regional institutions with no common umbrella. We're all independent of each other, sort of systemically, I guess you could say. And so this is where we came to the thinking that working as a group would be beneficial for a variety of reasons. These are similar data for the representation of women in engineering-related disciplines in the 4 institutions, showing that AFIT was not an anomaly in that regard. We recognize that the collective approach could have a variety of benefits. Obviously, it provides a community, so if people can get to know each other across institutions, you may reach a critical mass of numbers that would provide that, overcome the sense of isolation, provide a community of support, mentoring, and role models. We were all from different cultures, which became very apparent as we worked together, and we thought we could learn best practices and a diversity of approaches from each other, sort of get out of our own bastions and talk to each other about how different institutions solve common problems. And I'll get to this in a second. We also recognize that if we could hold each other accountable, this question of who holds you accountable is really important. If we could hold each other accountable, then that might enhance the likelihood that we would actually pay attention to what we were doing and get others to pay attention. So we had to create this sense of shared mission and programming across these 4 institutions. And we did this at a variety of levels. This, what we call the Leader Council, was a group we formed from upper administrators. You can see some of the people who were involved here, which we convened on a regular basis, and provided upper administration buy-in to our programming and to our mission and challenges, and also provided this social contract, which we actually formalized. We had the provosts of the 4 institutions sign a social contract which committed the 4 institutions to a common mission and to a sharing of data and to periodic, regular conversation to hold each other accountable across 4 different institutions. So the bottom of this page has all their signatures on it, and it talks about a commitment to addressing hiring needs and et cetera, to sharing institutional data. So the social contract you could think of simply as peer pressure. We were putting some faith in peer pressure as a force for good. So that was at the upper administrative level. We also recognized a critical role for department chairs in creating the climate that would support equity and diversity. And so we have worked hard to create a sense of training and also community for department chairs, working partly internally at our 4 institutions, and then shifting to a regional organization for Southwest Ohio that incorporates about 20 institutions in its structure. And this was hopefully to provide training that explicitly targeted the issues we were interested in, and also to create a sense of community among regional chairs that would facilitate sharing of information about opportunities, about solutions to problems, about hiring practices, et cetera. And then that's upper administration, and then chairs. We also created a network within the faculty ranks. This was through a program called Equity Advisors. The Equity Advisors was a model that was borrowed with modification from some other advanced programs. University of California, Irvine and Michigan were the 2 who we worked with the most, in which we identified faculty members typically at upper ranks who served as basically in the ranks ambassadors for equity, whether it was in hiring processes, in workplace climate, in fostering good practices and promotion, et cetera. So Iowa Wood, for example, is here today. One of the co-authors on this presentation has been equity advisor at the Air Force Institute of Technology for more than half a dozen years until just recently, and has these individuals, slightly different models at the different institutions, but have been very important in fostering good practices within the institution, within the departments, and for providing a point of contact for faculty who want to become involved or have issues to bring regarding equity. So that's all the overstructure. And what I really want to talk about is our experience with the effort to sustain a multi-institution model. As you can imagine, this creates some challenges. In fact, our program was the first, and I don't know if it's still the only, but one of the few institutional transformation grants awarded by the advanced program. So they were interested, specifically the National Science Foundation, in testing the viability of a multi-institution model as a way to address these kinds of challenges, and also to maybe help small institutions with the power of larger institutions that had more resources to bring to the table, a variety of things we were hoping to get out of this. And so what I want to mention is a few of the things that we tried and the challenge that has come with trying to make these things work across 4 institutions. So here's one thing we've done a lot of, programming. Dr. Bill Amoria, who I think is talking in the other room as we talk here, it was one of our visiting speakers along with many others. We've done a lot of programming to bring people together to explicitly talk about issues related to the mission of the advanced program. Equity, promotion, mentoring, et cetera. This is one example of a program we had. Dr. Stewart, who was the leader of the advanced program at University of Michigan. But we also, this represents also a challenge you can imagine to get all 4 presidents of 4 institutions on the program in the same room at the same time. That's a scheduling challenge that nobody wants to do more than once, I can promise. This kind of programming brought people together across all 4 institutions to a whole series of events. It really helps to create a sense of collegiality, a sense of visibility for the smaller institutions at the larger with the larger institutions, et cetera. And it also, this last point I think is really important, that having upper administrators, presidents, provosts, etc., speak in public settings about the value and importance of diversity and equity is hugely important to the faculty who don't often hear that kind of thing publicly. So that's a really important outcome of these kinds of events. The challenge, here's a map of the Dayton region. Here's downtown Dayton with University of Dayton. Right, here's a scale bar, so Wright State a few miles to the east, and Affit nearby on the Air Force Base, and Central State just a couple more miles, a few kilometers further out to the east. It turns out that the inertia of faculty is a tremendously difficult thing to overcome. And getting people, I mean, I'm sure you all know that, it's difficult to see your colleagues in the building next door. And getting faculty to cross town to go to events on a regular basis is really challenging. And if you don't really work at it, it's really hard to sustain. So these kinds of things really take intentional effort. Having great programming is not enough to get people to leave their building. You have to bother them a lot and push them and prod them to make it happen. Another thing we've heard about a lot, leadership matters. So I left the quote back on my seat, but Dr. Schmidtmann this morning talked about effective leadership as a strategic effort. There's no question about that. These are just some data for hiring, sex balance in hiring over the years, I guess I should say. The details don't matter. The point here is simply that who's in charge makes a difference. And the leaders of the institutions can really create change. So I think we probably all know that. But a major challenge to probably all of us is that leadership is incredibly fluctuating. The turnover is so high. So I just picked a year, 3 years ago, and this is a list of all of the deans, provosts, and presidents above the STEM colleges at our 4 institutions, and whether or not those positions have changed in identity over the last 3 years. And as you can see, almost every administrator has moved on, and I think only one of them moved up in the same institution to a different leadership position. The others all left. This is, I don't know if it's true in Europe and other parts of the world, but in the US, the culture of academic administration seems to be a few years and move, 5 years and out kind of thing. That creates tremendous challenge to sustainability, and I have come to think of sustainability not as getting great leadership, but as making things happen or putting things in place that are independent of leadership. You need to be prepared for the fact that the leadership you're working with is going to be gone 3 years from now. And that has important implications for what actually sticks, what's sustainable. Another thing we've worked on a lot, I mentioned dual career hiring. The National Science Foundation was hoping that our regional approach would really demonstrate a model that helped to address the challenge of dual career hiring. So we have a tremendous, I'd guess 3/4 of the faculty I interview, I'm a department chair for jobs in my department, have academic spouses who are looking for positions or need professional satisfaction as well. So, you know, one thing that working as a collective does is provide opportunities for communication, and that is not hard. I've said it's easy. It's not really easy, but it's workable. And we've done that in many ways through the Equity Fellows, through our various meetings, many meetings. But we also ultimately, with our collaborators at Case Western and Ohio State, so across the state of Ohio and even into West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania, the adjacent states, we were able to create a higher education recruitment consortium, which is a web-based platform for job searching, which facilitates searches by couples and by recruiters as well. So it works for both the seekers, both sides of the seeking. So that's now in place. You can go to the website and search for jobs in Ohio this way. So that's great, but to make it actually work, you need to be able to work across institutions, and we have tried to figure out how best to implement dual career hiring that crosses institutions. Some of our institutions have put practices and policies in place that now address this. Here's a policy at Wright State, which is now official institutional policy. Here's the dual career website at University of Dayton, which is not quite a full institutional policy yet, but is a strong statement on practices. But getting institutions to share money to make this happen is a real challenge. We've tried to have that conversation with the provosts and presidents of institutions. They like the idea, but it doesn't happen. So dual career hiring processes all have fiscal implications, and this is just a challenge. We have not overcome this challenge. And then the last issue goes back to this idea of sustainability requiring practices and processes that are independent of leadership. What I have come to really believe based on our experience is that the only way to make this happen is through the development of policy. So what I've said here is that institutional practice documents are useful. So here are two practice documents, what I call practice documents. This is a policy, it says, for faculty mentoring in the College of Science and Math at my own institution, Wright State. So the College of Science and Mathematics has implemented an expectation for mentoring, especially of junior faculty, but potentially beyond that through advancement. There's a detailed document, guidelines, etc. But it's up to the dean to make sure it happens, to really enforce that it happens. Some departments do this well, some departments are less rigorous about putting this in place. So it's what I call a practice document. It's a great set of guidelines, but if the dean changes, if the chairs don't pay attention, there's no enforcement behind it. Over here, again, the University of Dayton dual career program, a great program, but it's not yet institutional policy. And what that means is, again, as institutional leadership changes, the attention to making this happen is a little bit less stable. But formal policies have sustainable power, and here's an example from the Air Force Institute of Technology. One of the things we learned from the culture of AFIT is when they make a decision, this is the great thing about working with a military institution, they really make a decision. So they put things in writing and they make it stick. They put things like compliance is mandatory at the top. So I don't think my institution has anything that says that, even within the context of a faculty union and all kinds of things. So this is a policy about the involvement of equity advisors in processes at the Air Force Institute of Technology. Particularly, this is for search committees and hiring processes, that there is a mandatory involvement of the equity advisor in the process of searching for faculty at AFIT. So once you have that policy in place, people can point to it and say, we need to do this. If it's not happening, you have somewhere to point. And creating policies that cross institutions, I don't know if it's impossible, but it's probably at least close to impossible. So here's another, this is a document sort of similar to the contract, the social contract that I showed earlier. This has the signatures of the 4 presidents on it. This is a joint statement of cooperation for the 4 institutions in support of the objectives of the Leader Consortium. Sharing data, dual career hiring, best practices, etc. In programming and bringing faculty together. Signed by the presidents, but it's certainly not a policy. This is a statement of intentions, and it has words in it like, to the best extent possible, and, you know, as resources permit, that kind of thing, which are the only things that the presidents are willing to sign off on a multi-institutional commitment. This is fantastic. I mean, it's great to be able to bring this out and show it to people, but again, it's not a formal policy, and so that's a barrier to sustainability. We are currently looking at a hard end date for our advanced program later this year. And so the question is, in the face of all these challenges to working as a collective, what really has sticking power? And I think I won't be able to answer that question. Maybe the next STEM Gender Equity Congress, we can come back and tell you what's still in place. How many years is that? 3 years? 2 years? Next year? Every year. Okay, next year. I don't know if we'll know by next year. Our vision is to take this institutional model, departmental, individual, and institutional change, and wrap it in a regional approach. The question is whether this has sustainability. And I think many of us believe in the power of this collective approach and the value of bringing people together and the importance of making this stick. But the challenge is, in the face of continual turnover in leadership, the end of the advanced grant, is it sustainable? And so I will leave you with that question. I don't have an answer for it yet, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm going to push over a bit, otherwise our microphones are going to not sync. Thank you very much, Dr. Goldstein. It's interesting you should have mentioned that, because if we hadn't had that question we had earlier on, I would have asked Dr. Wright whether the fact that she had been rector in Switzerland, she'd been the first woman rector, I was wondering, to what extent was that sustainable? I was kind of putting everything together, and I was thinking of the video that Professor Rudd showed this morning, and I was wondering the fact that Dr. Wright had been a rector in Switzerland, if we'd asked school students in Switzerland, what is a rector, draw a rector, would they have drawn a woman because you'd been a woman of a university or not? And it's very interesting, your sticky point, the stickiness of it. I do hope you have more results next year, and that, the amount of work that all these speakers are sharing with us, I find it very frustrating. I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you all, and you do so much and we're trying so hard, and there's this little voice in me that thinks it shouldn't be that difficult. Why is it so hard? Why is it not sticking?
Well, the other thing I would say is the other thing that does stick, which people have talked about already several times, is cultural change. So I do believe that over time, one of the benefits, one of the outcomes of our program is I firmly believe that the conversation has changed. Right. And the attention and the acknowledgement, as
has
it was
increased.
Discussed earlier, of the issue is now on the table. And so there is a cultural change that absolutely sticks, but it takes a long time for demographics to change, at least in the American system.
Right, right. Chris, where's Chris? Do I have time for a question or not? One. I have time for one question. You're the winner.
My microphone. You can share.
Eileen Trauth, Penn State University. This is really interesting. I haven't seen an example of this before, of the interinstitutional work. The question is about peer pressure. So is there a benefit of, and you said the commitments, but do you see peer pressure where, like, the Air Force Institute of Technology is doing something and that might exert pressure on another institution to keep up?
I do think that really happens. I think the leaders, there's always the question of how much the talk translates to action, but certainly when they're in the room together, the expression is that, yes, they don't want to be seen. We sort of force data sharing in the open light of day, and you don't want to be seen as the one that's going in the opposite direction from the other three. So, yes, I think it really does have potential. It's hard to sustain, but it's real.
Dr. Goldstein, thank you very much. A round of applause for Dr. Goldstein. I have no idea.